This lecture is going to take us out of the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age, which is an extraordinarily important transition in technology, because as I'll discuss later on, iron's a far superior metal to bronze, and allow for great increases in warfare and the deadliness and efficiency of warfare, for that matter. Um, Now, the end of the Bronze Age is around, the transition of around 1000 BC. It's there's That's not the precise date that people will use. Some people like to use 1177. Some people like to use 10, whatever. But for our purposes, we'll say around 1000 BC. Um, and we just simply, and what happens is a lot of the great empires around the Eastern Mediterranean, not only the Mycenaeans, but others, collapse at this time. So the great Mesopotamian societies, the Hittites, etc., suffer great losses. And indeed, the Egyptians do as well, but the Egyptians manage to survive it. Uh, and there are a lot of theories about what is happening at the end of the Bronze Age, and we really don't have an answer to that. But one of the sort of interesting clues is about the Sea People that are recorded for us by the Egyptians, about these people that invaded from the sea, obviously, and they had to repel. And one of the ideas is that though the Egyptians were able to repel them, they other societies were not. And here we see a drawing of an engraving of the Pharaoh Ramses II of the 20th dynasty at a site called Medinet Habu. And here is the one wall showing him fighting the Sea People on the upper left and upper center. He's the largest person there because he's the most important. Once again, it's hieratic scale. Your social importances can be seen by your size in the image, and he has his large entourage with his chariot behind him, etc. So we see the battle in the upper left, and on the bottom it shows the Egyptians taking people off as prisoners of war. The site is located down near Luxor, getting down into Upper Egypt. So it's far south of the pyramids, and was more of Luxor and the areas around Thebes. That part of the Nile became the capital in the what's called the New Kingdom in the later periods of the classical Bronze Age for the Egyptians. And here we see an aerial view of the structure on the left. It's a mortuary temple, which means it was meant to celebrate Ramses III's life afterwards. But he would spend a lot of his own, living reign having this thing built, as pharaohs were wont to do. Here's another shot of it. I had a great opportunity to go there a few years ago, and you can what we're going to focus on is this what's called a pylon here, the first pylon. That's the entranceway here, and we can see in the left-hand side that doorway behind the palm tree, and then to the right of it you can see Ramses the Third. And this battle goes around the walls here. Interestingly enough, there are many sites that record this battle, so it's quite interesting. And here you can see just how the engravings are on the rocks. I just show you this so you can see, or I should say on the building blocks here, you can see just how hard they are to read at times. So, the scholars have had to sit down and carefully draw all these and put it together for us so it's much clearer in the black and white drawings. So once again, we see the Ramses the Third in the middle there, shooting his arrow to bow and arrow to our left, showing he's in this state of war, and we want to focus on the upper left hand quadrant of this engraving. And what it shows are people that they call the Sea People. people that from the Great Green Sea, as they call the Mediterranean. Uh, Now, let me jump to the chase. We don't know who these people are, but there's a lot of discussions about it, uh, including and also some of them saying that they might even be Mycenaeans, or part of them might be Mycenaeans. The in the top center, we see sort of a colorized version of a portion of the battle, and we see a guy here on the right with this sort of strange helmet we haven't seen before. But on the bottom left, we can see two boats engaging. The Egyptians on the left, and on the right are these guys with mohawk haircuts. Um, and these are the sea people. And we can see that they are attacking the boats, but they're being attacked themselves. Some live, some die, etc. But there are many people in the sea peoples because the Egyptians would list many of the names. So it's not just one people. And what we primarily have are their headdresses. And so we have these guys with the sort of the mohawk um, headdress, but then other ones. And it's been speculated, as you can see on the bottom left, that where they might be from, and on the bottom right, what soldiers, what they might have looked like, etc. We really don't know, but it seems to be a time where the power of the sea was collapsing away from the great empires on the shores, and people were coming from somewhere else, most likely the West, and attacking. Um, Notice the different headdresses on this slide. We see the Mohawk one on the left. The bottom two and the upper right show guys with horns on their helmets. And these are not like the horns on the helmets we saw on the warrior vase. And on the top center, we can see, the battle on the ship and people, fighting it out in this naval attack. Now, let's focus in once again on just the ships themselves. And then on the bottom here, you can see don't worry about the E and the N, the numbers, etc. But the bottom, it's been interpreted to have the progression of the battle from the upper left down to the lower right, where we see at the bottom right there is an Egyptian grabbing one of the sea people off the boat. And the battle seems to be not unlike land battles, in the sense that all the boats did was they had grappling hooks, these big sort of three-pronged hooks they could swing around on a rope and then throw to the other boat and then pull it close by. And then the people could hop on the boat and fight, quite frankly, as if they were on land. I point this out because later on, when we get to the Athenians, we're going to see that ramming is really important in naval battles. But they're not ramming at this point, as far as we can tell. And here, once again, we see our sea peoples, a detail of our sea peoples. But what I want to focus on is the type of sword they carry. And this is quite interesting. It's called a Naue Type 2. Okay, Naue was just a scholar that lived way back when, and he gave a typology for different types of swords. That's all it was. And it's handy to use. It's a shorthand for scholars to use. And the one on the left here is the Naue type. And what's important about in contrast to the daggers we've seen so far, like, for example, the lion hunt dagger, it isn't a dagger for starters, okay? It's a longer blade. And most importantly is that the handle, it's made with the handle as part of the blade. The handle is not attached afterwards. And so this makes for a much, much, much stronger weapon. And I want you to look at the very bottom left, and you can see the cross section of the blade, and how it's not flat, but sort of bulges out in the middle. And this is quite purposeful because these swords were for hacking and slashing at the opponent. Do not think of sword battles like we see with, let's say, like I don't know, the Three Musketeers or something, where these guys have rapiers they're fencing, like we see in the Olympics, for example. Those sort of swords weren't used in battle; they were useless. What you wanted was something really big and heavy, in order to dismember your opponent, to take limbs off, to take heads off. Um, let's go to another slide here just to show you the different types of Nawe Type 2 swords, and some on the bottom right, some replicas of real ones. So yeah, you wanted to go into battle swinging a heavy sword. If you've ever had the opportunity to carry to handle a sword from let's say the Middle Ages, or a replica of it, one of the things that shocks you when you first pick it up is how heavy it is. And this is purposeful because, once again, do not think of these battles as a person holding a rapier in one hand, those sort of small round swords, and then his left hand in an arced position, or against his akimbo on his hip, like we see in the Olympics. No, people were coming in holding these things with two hands, and they were swinging to take off heads, to take off parts of bodies, to disable their opponent as quickly as possible. And so one of the important things was to have the handle attached to the blade, so quite frankly, it wouldn't break off. Now, these are mold made. That is to say that they weren't hammered into shape or anything like this. What they took was at first bronze and now iron, and they could pour it into a mold, and then let the whole thing cool as one unit. And then they could put a piece of wood around the handle or what have you. But the handle was attached. And with iron, there's iron takes a much higher temperature to make than does bronze, but at the same time, it's a lot more available in the Eastern Mediterranean. So once they're able to extract iron ore from stones, they could start making tons of these. So not only is this new design important, but it could now be mass produced because of the iron being so prevalent everywhere. And it seems to be that there's a bit of an arms race going off in the Bronze Age with this new weapon that's making it around the Eastern Mediterranean, including the sea people carrying them, and perhaps cause some fear in others because they'd never dealt with anybody with such a superior weapon, which could hack from both sides as well as jab, thrust into the body. So they were, it's called a parry and thrust maneuver, where you swing the sword from over your shoulder against the person, and then as you bring it back up to over your shoulders, you can get a thrust in, and then bring it over your shoulder, and then hack down again. And so we can see some of the sea people attacking the Egyptians, and these swords are carried at times, although perhaps not on this slide here. But take my word for it, they are used in this. And so that's quite interesting. Once again, the battle seems to progress from the upper left to the lower right. And where boats engage each other, and then the ones on the top left are basically defeated by the time they get to the bottom right. And then they were taken off on the bottom there as prisoners of war. Interestingly enough, Ramses III shows him defeating the sea people, which nobody else seemed to be able to do. But at the same time, Egyptians never had these big inscriptions done for battles they lost. Take it with a grain of salt. But in any case, this is basically our only evidence for what might have happened at the end of the Bronze Age. We're not sure, but this is one prevalent idea that's out there. But there's really not much evidence for it outside of Medinet Habu, and there's one other reference to these sea people. And once again, they have this, mohawk. Some of these guys have the mohawk haircut, or some guys, as we see in the bottom right, have horns on their helmets. Uh, and here, just once again, some more depictions of them. There are some clues. Like there's one tribe. It's called the Sicels, which people believe might be the Sicilians. But then a lot of other names that are we don't know where they're from. A lot of them we think might be from the Western Mediterranean, invading into the East. Um, and once again, it's primarily from Egyptian, or it's completely from the Egyptian evidence that this argument has been made. There are other theories that the end of the Bronze Age could have come from environmental changes, or just a complete sort of systems collapse with all these large empires that are going back and forth in the Eastern Mediterranean time. And if I can just step aside for a moment, I do want to say large empires because the Mycenaeans were actually not as large as the Egyptians were, or the Hittites in what's now Turkey were. They weren't anywhere as powerful as those empires, but they were significant, and indeed they were the people that would fight in the Trojan War. So once again, I just want to just pull back from this picture a bit. We see Ramses III attacking from the upper right, defeating the Sea Peoples, and then taking them off as prisoners of war. So he claims to have won this. And we can see the hieroglyphs in the top there. And this is which tells us what's happening. And this is pretty much our strongest evidence for what might have occurred at the end of the Bronze Age. And we can see here Ramses defeats them on the left here. I showed you this from a distance of Medinet Habu in the early slides, but here he holds a whole bunch of them by their heads or by their hair rather, and is about to dispatch with them in a sort of traditional pose that Egyptian pharaohs had when they defeated people. And on the right, once again, they are taking the prisoners away. And so know the Medinet Habu and the Sea People as just one idea of what could have happened. We can go into the other theories, but the simple fact is we'll never know the answer to it. At least in this, we have a depiction of raiders. Although the Egyptians did not completely collapse, and they didn't say that they it killed their empire. In fact, they say they defeated them. But that's about our only hint. But with that, we will get into the Iron Age, and where we will see, a great change in warfare because of iron and the ability to mass produce weaponry. And so we'll see great change in, for example, Greek warfare, where things like, the phalanx and the hoplites, which I'll discuss later, will emerge. But basically what it means is that in the large picture, is that the military service gets somewhat democratized. Everybody gets to be part of it. It's not just the royal families, although the royal families will continue to be generals, let's say, but it'll allow for a lot greater fighting of sort of the common man. If you know perhaps from the Iliad that the heroes that fight there are the kings of their land. In the Bronze Age they had it together where we all paid taxes to a king, and then the king did the fighting. But somehow things changed over time, and we all paid taxes to, not a king, but we paid taxes to somebody, and that person has us do the fighting. So in some ways, the Bronze Age had it a little bit better. But with that, once again, we'll get into the Iron Age and see that there's a big collapse, and there's have to be reorganization of the societies that will lead us into the Greek past that you're probably more familiar with. So with that, we will end the Bronze Age.